Many people have made incorrect assumptions that the archetypal energy of the zodiac signs are contained in the stars, as if the planets are like these filters, or maybe a better word is transistors, which receive energy from the starry constellations as they shine through the planets towards the Earth. It's as if there's this pervading image of like an imaginary cylindrical well where the light of the planets is filtered through, almost like the stained glass of a church. And this stained glass is supposed to be the archetypal energy of the suns, right? This is how everybody understands. Even people in the tropical Western sphere will be, this seems to make sense, doesn't it? And especially those of us in the Newtonian, mechanical Western world will always try to put it, most scientific-minded people will try to explain it this way. How do we define the tropical zodiac? We use 2 points. Number 1 is the solstices and the equinoxes. These define the 4 cardinal points which the remaining months and signs are derived from. This comes from the Surya Siddhanta in the Vedic tradition. B is the lengths of each day. The lengths of each day reveal where we are in the calendar between winter, Capricorn, and summer, Cancer, between winter and summer solstices. I'm going to explain this more as we go on, but essentially what this is saying, both of these are a picture of 6 p.m. In the summer, 6 p.m., it's the evening, but the sun is still very brightly out. In the winter, however, the sun is long gone and it's dark, and it's a winter day. It's still 6 p.m. So the lengths of each, that's because in the summer, the daylight there's much more daylight. And in the winter, there's much less daylight. We all experience this every year, right? I'm in this. As for the Tropical Vedic tradition, Vic Dicara commonly points to the Surya Siddhanta for the first premier definition for what exactly defines the tropical zodiac. It goes something like this. Draw a line between the 2 solstices. Draw another line between the 2 equinoxes. This defines the hub or the core of the wheel of the sky. These 2 lines are intended to be drawn as a cross, and the cross, of course, has Gnostic resonance with many practitioners of esoteric Western magic. Next, we hear the following, right? So this is the first cross, okay? And this is Earth going around the sun. We know that the Earth has a solstice, and it has a summer solstice and a winter solstice. Between these 2, which is all, how do we know this? It's by measuring the lengths of the day. We're going to get to that eventually. So it's June 21st is the summer solstice. It's the 1st degree of Cancer. Winter solstice is December 21st. It's the 1st degree of Capricorn. Now, the next stanza we read is, between each point on the cross, put 2 more points or borders. When we place these 2 points between the cross, we get 12 signs. And it's done like this. It's not, the sun is not visiting a certain point in the sky and that signifies that we're entering that sign. It's a matter of dividing the 360 degrees of a circle into 12. So this, this is part of the, at least again, this is the Vedic bones of how to understand the tropical zodiac. So next thing that we read is that in the Surya Siddhanta, we next read, it takes 6 months for the sun to reach the northern summer solstice after entering Capricorn. And it takes 6 months to reach the southern or winter solstice after entering Cancer. And of course, we read that the 12 divisions beginning from Aries are certainly the months which constitute a year. So we start at Aries, we start at the equinox, and the 12 divisions beginning from that equinox point certainly show the months which constitute a year. So this is what I mean when I say the zodiac is a phenomenon of the calendar more than of space or the stars. And this is what we tropical astrologers practice without realizing it. Now, let's bring this down to earth here, folks, okay? Think about it. When you input birth data into a software like Cafe Astrology or AstroDienst, and I'm going to do that. We've got AstroDienst, we're going to bring it up, okay? Imagine you put a birth date for March 21st. Does everybody know what March 21st is? March 21st is the day of the Vernal Equinox. That's the point during the year when it's the first day of spring. What defines the first day of spring? It's the calendar, but what defines the calendar? What defines the calendar that we use is that the first day of spring, March 21st, is when the days and nights have equal length. After December 21st, after Christmas, the sun is risen. Well, that's more of an Easter thing. The sun is born, and the days get progressively longer. So let's get back to our example with the vernal equinox. The first day of spring is March 21st. Now, what would you say that is in an astrology chart? When it is March 21st, the sun is at 0 degrees of Aries, isn't it? Most people have heard this before. The ram of spring comes because it's halfway through the journey from the winter solstice to the summer solstice. So most beginner astrologers hear this and they assume the first day of spring in the calendar is going to line up with the so-called constellation Aries. And you'd think it would, but it doesn't. Okay? Now, follow me here, folks. All right? We're going to go. Just make sure. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is AstroDienst. It's a great little free astrology software that they have. Let's look at the day that we're building here. We're talking about a male. The birthday is the 21st of March, 1993. Arbitrary year. Let's say they're born at noon, and let's say they're born in Toronto. Continue. The rising sign is going to be whatever it is, but what we're looking for is the sun sign. The sun, as we can see here, I wish I could zoom in on this more. The sun sign is in Aries, and it's 1 degree of Aries. We can see that the 0 point of Aries for a tropical astrologer, right? We're tropical astrologers, folks. That's what AstroDienst is. If you look it up on Cafe Astrology, any tropical software, you look up March 21st, the sun is going to be at 1 degree of Aries. Always. Every time. Right? So this all makes sense. Doesn't seem to be a problem here, right? For us astrologers, because we are all used to using this software, it makes simple enough sense that March 21st, the first day of spring, is going to be the 1st degree of Aries. Now, if you looked up a birth chart of somebody born at March 21st today on a sidereal software, using the sidereal zodiac, the star-based zodiac, the sun is not going to be at 0 degrees Aries. It's going to be at 6 degrees of Pisces. In fact, it's going to be nowhere near the stars anciently associated with Aries in the sky. Okay? So you look up in the sky, anciently, there's been this star pattern called Aries, right? So why doesn't the first day of spring in the tropical line up with the first degree of the star of Aries? Now we're going to look up. We've just looked up our tropical chart on AstroDienst. Now we're going to go to a chart that is a Vedic chart that uses what's called the Lahiri Ayanamsha. That's essentially, this is a sidereal chart. okay? This is a star-based chart. The name is whatever, the date, same date, March 21st, 1993 at noon in Canada, in Toronto. I'm going to continue. Now, what we see here, those of you who are Westerners might not recognize this type of chart, but essentially these squares are the zodiac. The corner pieces are the mutable signs. So Aries is up here at the top, and right next to it is Taurus. There's nothing in Aries. What we see is that the sun, remember this is March 21st in a sidereal chart, the sun is at 7 degrees of Pisces in this corner pocket. Therefore, the sun at March 21st is actually nowhere near the ancient star, the star grouping called Aries, which people once looked in the sky and said, you know what, that looks like a ram. And when you look at star maps of so many different things, people have this idea of Aries. The sun at March 21st is nowhere near that star grouping. So this is the debate fleshed out. Which one's correct, right? What exactly gives here? So why doesn't the first day of spring line up with what is anciently called the constellation of Aries in the stars? I'll tell you, it once did 2,000 years ago. This is the nature of the cognitive dissonance that's happening, is that the sun has progressed through what's called the precession of the equinox. So then we ask, what is this so-called constellation Aries in the sidereal chart? When we have always said that there's a star grouping called Aries, what is making that up? Who decided that that was going to be a thing? This might sound familiar to you. Some people use this as an argument given to disprove astrology on the whole. The precession of the equinox is to blame, as we'll explain. And as tropical astrologers, this is not a problem for us because, as I said, we don't use the stars. We use the first day of spring. Right? Essentially, tropical astrologers follow the point where the sun was during the equinox. And this point, which creates the astrology chart, really how it is that the point where the sun is in the sky at the first day of spring, that's what we call the vernal equinox point. We call that cosmic east in tropical astrology. Now, let's say Saturn is 180 degrees from that point. It's in Libra. It's at 0 degrees Libra. That's how we know where Saturn is in the tropical astrology chart. Has nothing to do with Saturn being close to Aldebaran or some star out there that relates to one of the star groupings. Has to do with the fact that Saturn is opposite cosmic east, the vernal equinox point. So this is how tropical astrologers actually make a chart. Now, the point where the sun is in relation to the earth during the first day of spring in our calendar, where the sun is in the sky, in the backdrop of the stars, this has moved against the background of the stars over a period of 2,000 years. So 2,000 years ago, you got to understand, people, that we're going to explain this, okay? Because back then, people didn't have astrology softwares. So they were looking at planets in the sky, and they didn't have the knowledge that we're talking about right now. We take it for granted that we look up and we just know that we look up a date in a software and that the sun is going to be here and that it's all going to work in the tropical way. But back in the day, it was very hard for people to make a chart. The stars, at some point, people needed to use the stars in order to plot where the planets are. Because think about it. you can only see the planets for half the day because the sun skews the planets for half the day. We use software, so we don't think about this kind of stuff. I didn't either until I started to talk with Vic Dicara about it. Half the day is gone in any day. You can only study astrology at night. And what happens if you're only looking at half the sky? So what if you've got planets on the other half of the Earth? You won't be able to see them for that half of the year. Now, what about Venus and Mercury? It would be very difficult to plot Venus and Mercury because they're always close to the sun, which means when the sun rises, it's going to be very rare that you're going to be able to really plot Venus and Mercury. Mars is the same way. Mars does, it takes 2 years for Mars to go back to the same point in the zodiac. And the Mars is going with the sun's movement. So when the sun is conjunct Mars, it's like invisible to astrologers for like a long time before it strays from the sun and becomes opposite the sun, and we could see it in the night sky. So this is just stuff to give you a bit of grounding on what early astrologers had to do in order to practice astrology. So once everybody started to get the idea that this astrology thing is a thing, it was for a long time, they didn't know exactly how to do it. They heard whispers from the rishis that the planets could be marked in order to show the progression of the soul. So how would people have instinctively done it? There's different ways they thought they could have done it. At first they kind of thought of it this way, okay? It takes the sun it takes the Earth 365 years to revolve around the sun. 365 days. It takes the Earth 365 days to revolve around the sun, right? So what they thought, let's say for example with Saturn, it takes Saturn 27 years to travel around the zodiac. And this is something they would have noticed. So let's say Saturn is at 15 degrees of Libra. It has traveled about 4% of the tropical zodiac from 0 degrees Libra. Right? Because when you think about it, 15 degrees of the 360 circle is 4%. Around there. Right? So they thought, okay, Saturn has traveled 4% of the zodiac. But they could have thought that. But it doesn't work that way. The thing is that Saturn doesn't have an exact trajectory. It has an oval orbit, and it has retrogrades. So it's not that easy to calculate. You couldn't just calculate it as like percents in this way. And this is what Vic Dicara says. And this is how he explained it to me. If a car is going 60 kilometers per hour, one way, and it just travels for 1 hour, then it's very easy to know it will be exactly 60 kilometers from wherever it started after 1 hour of driving. So we'll know that it drove 60 kilometers. If it drives straight for 1 hour, it's 60 kilometers an hour. But what if the driver accelerates and decelerates a lot, and by huge amounts? And sometimes it even turns around, it goes backwards, retrograde. How will you figure it out? How will you figure out where it is after 1 hour of driving? This is the issue for early astrologers. They couldn't just say that Saturn has progressed, that Saturn is going to progress in a steady amount over the 27 years, because it's going to go retrograde. It's got an oval orbit, which means certain parts of the year it's going faster and slower, right? These are all things that they had to account for. This is why early astrologers instinctively said, you know what, screw this. Let's just observe it in the night sky. Even if we can only see Saturn half the year, we can plot its movements. The thing is that what really got astrology started was having an ephemeris. is understanding the motions of the planets. There was a point when really the most difficult thing was that they didn't know the nature of the driver of the planet's motions. Because once they discovered the planet's motions, that they could guess where the planets are, even though the sun blinded it halfway throughout the day. This was a painstaking process that we're going to kind of discuss in a bit more detail. But essentially, it's like bird watchers. Bird watchers, they sit outside their window and they notice year after year, oh, there's the warblers. The warblers are coming in. They're nesting in the fir trees. They hang out there for 3 months, and then they go off to another spot. And then they call their buddies and say, hey, I'm in Pennsylvania. The warblers just came and rested in my fir trees. Now they're probably going to be making your way in about a few weeks up there in Toronto, Canada, and they're going to probably stay there for the spring. And then the people in Toronto, Canada said, yep. Call up the people in Pennsylvania. Yeah, the warblers are here. You were right. And over time, these bird watchers, meticulously year after year, have defined the path of the warbler, of the bird. It's the same thing for when early astrologers were trying to mark the paths of the planets. So it was when the bird watchers plotted down the planetary movements in an ephemeris, century after century after century, they said, we've got it. After about 500 years, like that's a lot of time to plot these warblers. They had it down about 500 years. So astrology having started around 500 BC, it was in around 0 AD, 100 AD, 200 AD, that books like the Surya Siddhanta started being written. That books like authors like Varamahira, the Greek authors of the Zodiac, started to solidify and crystallize what they were trying to do. And this is an important point, ladies and gentlemen, because as we're going to explain, it was at this time that people got astrology and they said, okay, so we understand the motions of the planets, and all we have to do, we know that Mars has a certain trajectory, and it's going to go retrograde here, but it's going to go, and then it's going to go retrograde here, and then it's going to go. We've got it down now. So now all we have to do is memorize where the vernal equinox is. Because if we've memorized where the vernal equinox is, we know where cosmic east is, so that when Mars is in Scorpio, we know it's at this star, and this star, let's say it was probably Jesta at the time, I believe. So Mars is in Scorpio, it's at the star of Jesta. We know Jesta is this far from the vernal equinox at the time. So we don't even need to plot where Mars has progressed from the vernal equinox point. We just know that Jesta is this far from the vernal equinox. And they memorized that point, and they fixed it to the stars. This is the issue. They forgot that it was supposed to be a temporary picture that they took there. Burn that in your brain, folks, because it's going to be important for us later. Now, this is what we want to understand here as tropical astrologers. It's the distance of a planet from the sun's position at the spring equinox, which is a calendar phenomenon, it has nothing to do with the stars. It's a planet's distance from cosmic east at the spring equinox. And we know that point because that's where the sun is when the days and nights are equal. That is how we know. That is how we mark the zodiac. It's the lengths of the day. It has nothing to do with observations. It has nothing to do even with the seasons, technically. It has to do with the calendar of the year. This makes up the planet's position in the zodiac. My cat just walked in. I thought I protected my bounds. It's okay, he's chilling. So everybody, this is the nature of tropical astrology, is that it has everything to do with the distance of a planet from the vernal equinox point. It has nothing to do with the stars. It's time for our musical interlude. Everybody, just give me a moment. Don't worry, you don't have to sing. I don't have any words prepared anyway. Nothing other than the simplest words that most people should know from Mary Poppins. I'm going to try and show everybody here. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is a universal pattern. You can play. That's called the major scale. Okay? Now, musicians understand that there's a difference between tones and there's a difference between notes. The note, the fa, is the fourth note in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, it's the distance between do and fa, do, fa, that makes fa what it is. Do, fa. Do is like the equinox. You can follow this pattern from any pitch, like any star. But fa will always be a set distance from do. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, fa. Do, fa. Because fa is always a set distance from do. So you can start the do on any part of the guitar. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. But it'll always be the same scale, the same melody. Likewise, Gemini is not fixed to a pitch. It's not fixed to a certain note. So Gemini is not fixed to a certain pitch or a star. Rather, Gemini is always 60 degrees from the starting point of the vernal equinox, signifying Aries. Just as fa, 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 do, re, mi, fa, fa is always a set distance from do, no matter where you started off. So Gemini is always a set distance from the vernal equinox point called Aries, 0 degree Aries. Gemini is always 60 degrees from Aries. Whether you started on the G note or the A note or the B note, fa is always the same distance from do. And whether you start the vernal equinox at the star of Ashwini, or if you started at the star of Jesta, or if you started at the star of Uttara Bhadrapada, where it is today, Gemini is always going to be 60 degrees from the vernal equinox. You guys get where I'm at there? The fact that you can move the starting do note in a scale to any pitch and still create the same scale is just like saying that you can have the equinox occur at any star in the star wheel, and it will still be the start of the tropical zodiac. So, what started to happen is people started saying that the star map is wrong. Now, a lot of groups got that. In fact, most of the astrology world understood it. The Greeks understood it. The Babylonians understood it. Just about everyone got with the program and stuck with tropical astrology as something that is conveyed by the equinox. Not a fixed point in the sky, but from the point that the sun is at during the first day of spring. That's what moves. Really, it's all the four cardinal points. Now, unfortunately, the Indian people And I should say this because there is a blessing and a curse that has come from what we call the traditionalism of India. I am not an Indian person. I'm a Caucasian person in Canada, and we have to understand where I'm coming from with this. I'm trying to speak to something that has happened in history. And the first thing I'll say is that I'm a Vedic person. I think the traditionalism of India is one of their great blessings. If the people of India didn't hold so preciously to their ancient scriptures and knowledge, I would not be a Vedic person today. It's a very good thing that they are a traditionalist in this way, but it has its disadvantages. We have to understand that because of the traditionalism of Indian astrologers around 2,000 years ago, specifically because they were susceptible to, they were using the stars before any of us were, because of the Nakshatras. Remember what I said, the Nakshatras, where the moon had its 27 wives in the stars. That was a star-based map, and the Indian people were the only ones doing that for thousands of years before astrology came about. Like I said, Vedic Zodiac astrology happened around 500 BC. The Indians were studying the Nakshatras, the stars, like 2000 BC, probably before that. There's no way of saying, really, how long they've been studying the Nakshatras. So the Indian people were specifically susceptible to marrying what they learned when everybody came together after Alexander the Great, 500 BC. All these cultures came together and were like, hey, everybody, we're chill. No more war for this couple of centuries. Cue the Dark Ages, when there was a lot more war. But before the Dark Ages, around the turn of the millennium, after Alexander the Great, there was this rest period where all these cultures came together and synthesized the idea of personal horoscopy. That was using the Vernal Equinox through the Tropical Zodiac. The Indian people were particularly susceptible to having a photographic lock or fixation of the Vernal Equinox point in the stars because they were already using the stars for the Nakshatras. And the traditionalism of the Indian people caused them to marry, let's say, at the time, they noticed that the Vernal Equinox was at Ashwini. And it was. And they said, boom, simple, boom Shiva. All we got to do is just count everything from Ashwini. And what they started to do is they started to cross-interpret when someone had the sun in Ashwini and the sun in Aries. They said anyone with early Aries placements is going to have the qualities of Ashwini, the nakshatra. They married them together. And they're the only culture that did that because of this particular susceptibility. Now, that we're going to talk about that more. I'm going to talk about it with Vic Dicara on Tuesday, and I'm going to go more into that later on when I do more videos on this series.